Hi, hello. Ignore the casual 10-month gap between this and the last video. A few things happened to me during that time. I started college. I ended up having to change the way I approached recording for this video like halfway through it. I was working on my games and prioritizing those, so again, apologies for the long gap. Hopefully the other videos won't take very long to make. I just lost motivation to do this for a while because of other stuff happening. Anyways, that's enough yapping, on with the video. Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to part 4 of the how to make a FNaF Fangame in Clickteam Fusion tutorial. Today we're finally going to be starting on the office. We are just going to get right into our office frame and we're actually going to expand this here just so we can, because we got to change a couple things with our actual frame here first before we even do anything. This is essentially the first thing that I always do whenever I'm making an office, is just put the office image in first. Of course, this will just be a normal active. I'm just going to take the one from FNaF 1. Import, we'll just import it with our default settings. And good. And then we're going to center it to where it's like this. As soon as you put your office image in here, the very first thing that we want to do is actually set up the scrolling. So the first step in doing this, if you notice this like outline here, this is the size of the office frame. What we need to do is we need to have it where it's the size of our actual office image. So in FNaF 1, the size of the image is 1600 by 720. So to change the frame, and not the application size, by the way, because we still want this to be 1280 by 720, but the frame size of the office frame specifically, which is going to be this little booger right here. So underneath your application, you have the different drop downs for each frame. So we're going to select on our office frame, and under size, underneath the settings properties, we're going to change the 1280 here to 1600 and make that the size of our frame. So as you can see now, there's been another outline, and this now exemplifies the size of the actual office frame. So if you've seen other like FNaF Clickteam tutorials online, a lot of the tutorials will probably be like, well, first you gotta make an app. You guys, just use this. The reason I say that is because this is pretty much a setup for any kind of scrolling you'll ever have to use. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be using a separate object for scrolling. So this is not an object that you're going to be able to find in Clickteam's extension manager, because if you search up sunken camera, well, of course it's up here for me because I have it installed already. But if you do not have it installed and you try searching it through the extension manager, it's not going to show up. So you're going to have to go and actually download it. I'm going to provide the object for you guys in the description underneath this video. And with that, I'm also going to provide the video that I made about a month or so ago on how to install extensions and shaders in case you don't know how to do that. Once you get this object, we're just going to select that and plop it down right here. So you're probably wondering, okay, why is this even good? So there's a bunch of different settings that you can activate through here. Some flags you can toggle on and off, some values you can change. It's going to be all under the settings in the sunken camera object. So the divisor is basically how fast your actual scrolling is. So I believe it's the lower the number, the faster the scrolling is. So the dead zone, basically what that means is the area in the center of your frame where no scrolling will take place. So basically, the higher this number is, the wider the area in the center is where the office won't scroll at all. And then the factor, and of course there's other options that you can toggle. You can actually disable easing if you want. So if you want a look to the classic FNaF scrolling, looks like this, there's a setting for that as well, where you can toggle on vertical scrolling, which is basically the same thing, but it goes vertically. Obviously, since this office only goes horizontally, we won't need to use that. And then there's this option called patent file scrolling. So if you guys have ever seen like Fnati 2020 and CCR, where the scrolling is really reactive depending on where your mouse is on the frame. I'm just going to show you guys what that looks like. So it looks like this. So like, you know, there's no dead zone. It's really reactive on like where your mouse is. And then if we turn on easing, this will actually this will be a lot smoother as well. So technically speaking, there really is no real reason to not use this object when it comes to scrolling. Like I said, that's not the only option, but it is the option that I recommend because it saves time and it's very, very flexible. So that's the scrolling, and I know you guys are probably expecting me to show off some like grand thing for programming the scrolling, but honestly, there just really isn't when you can just use this extension. And like I said, I will provide a download for that in the description below, and I'll also link down the video where I talked about how to download extensions and shaders. And speaking of shaders, that's actually going to be the next thing, because as you probably know, this does not really look all much like what FNaF 1 looks like. There's an actual like perspective. It just kind of looks super flat like this. What we're going to do is we are actually going to create another layer, and this is really important for Office frames specifically because there's usually a lot more going on. So in case you guys haven't noticed, on the right side here throughout this entire series, I have had a layer toolbar pinned. By default, you're not going to have this pin, so to actually view your layers toolbar, we're going to click on view here, go to toolbars, and then click on the layers toolbar. And then for this guy specifically, if you click on this little pin over here, it's going to be the side, but like this little pin button, just click on it, because if you don't have it pinned, your layers toolbar will just do this. And the issue with this is if you have a lot of layers, it'll take ages for this to move in every single time that you hover over the toolbar. So just click on this little pin here and you'll have it pinned. There's like no reason not to do this. So anyways, we're going to make a new layer by clicking on the new layer button over here, and we are going to actually make another active object. Before anyone says anything, no, I will not be using the perspective object because it's very, very bad, and this will be a good opportunity to show you guys neat stuff about shaders. So we're going to make a new active. And this is going to look really counterintuitive at first, but I promise this will be really helpful. So first, we're going to clear this image, so this little button over here will do that. So this little button here with the circle and the little dot in the middle, this is going to be useful for some important things. So for right now, I'm just going to set the hotspots like the top left here. So like this 3x3 grid, you can like set this little dot thingy here to wherever you want. You can even set it manually. And then we're just going to have this be a single color. I usually like having this be a bright green because green is the best color, and we're just going to fill it. And this is going to be our actual perspective. So we're going to call this perspective. Boom. And then go to size and position. I'm just going to set this to 0, 0. And we're going to stretch this across the whole frame, not the entire thing, across the size of our actual application. So 1280 by 720, so not the actual office frame, but the size that our game is, which is 1280 by 720. And then what we're going to do is go to runtime options, and there's a couple things we should check off here. First of all, we want to uncheck follow the frame because we don't want this to drag behind on the left whenever we scroll right. We want this to stay in the same exact spot no matter where we are in the frame. Okay. Now, you may think, so Matt, what did this accomplish? Literally all that you've done is just put a green screen over the game, which, yes, that's true right now. However, if we go into our perspective object and go to our display options here, if we scroll down to this little section called effect, we can click where it says none, and as soon as we do, this little edit button will appear. So if we press edit, this is where we get into our shaders toolbar. So when you first open this up, you're literally just going to have like the standard shaders up here, and then that's literally going to be it. Like you won't have anything else installed. Literally all of the ones that I have installed here are all things that I got online. So again, reference back the video that I linked where I show you guys how to install shaders. We're going to pick a shader. Essentially what a shader is, for people who don't know or who need a recap, they're basically just visual effects, okay? That's what the bottom line is. So of course, we're going to want to pick an effect that will give like the FNaF 1 perspective. Okay, so the name of the perspective that we're gonna, or the shader that we're gonna be using is called Panorama Perspective. I'm gonna see if I can also link that specific shader in the description for this video as well. But if for whatever reason I can't, I'll try to help you guys out, like either in the description or just adding a little end thing to the end of the video, showing you guys which shader I ended up using. I would recommend keeping these first two settings untouched. If you want to change how powerful it is, it's going to be horizontal field of view and vertical field of view. And you can just change both of these as so. A lower number is less intense, and a higher number is more intense. So like we should probably keep these at like 75, for example. And that gives off obviously not the exact same effect, but believe me, it is in my opinion better than the perspective object. And that's about it for that. So yeah, we got the scrolling done, got the perspective done. So obviously we want to start setting up some of the other stuff. So now going back to our office layer here, we're not going to be building this off the perspective layer, obviously. We're going to make a new object, and usually I like to make the door buttons first, so that's what we're going to do. Now, of course, depending on the kind of game that you're going to be making, you know, your door buttons could look different. Heck, your game may not even have like a light system or anything like that, and if it does, your doors and your lights may not be like, you know, in the same object like it is in FNaF 1. However, just in case, I'm gonna go ahead and import these in really fast. Obviously, you can have all these in as the different animations. Okay, so once you've imported all these in, I'm actually gonna move this over here. So you should have a state for each like variable, for example, because let's say that your door and light buttons are the same object, then this will apply to you guys specifically. So we need a state where they're both off, a state where each one is on, and then a state where they're both on. Before we move on, in direction options, we need to actually change a value here, and that's speed. So we're just gonna set the speed to 0. What this does is this just turns these into stagnant frames, so it's not going to play all these frames at once and then end. Once we are done importing our door buttons, which, by the way, we're just going to put these in here really fast. I'm actually going to zoom in just so I can see these a bit better. The center. There we go. Now we're going to add in the actual door object. So now when we go into our editor, we're going to import all of the door animation frames. Make sure to have import as animation turned on here. And then we'll go to direction options here and set the animation speed over to 0. Okay, so once we've got the door finished and once we've adjusted its position, we're going to go over to our door buttons object, and we're going to add 2 flags to it. If you don't remember, flags is going to be under the values setting down here. So we're going to press new twice here because we're making 2. So this is going to be for checking if the door and the light is on. So we're just going to go ahead and name this door status, and then we're going to call this one light status. So once we've done that, we're going to go to our event editor, and we're going to start making some code. So the first thing we're going to do is right click on here. We're going to hover over insert and go to group of events. As soon as you do, this will appear. So we're just going to go ahead and call this doors because we're doing door coding, and we're going to apply that. This is a particularly important step to do because especially with all of these large frames like office frames, you're going to want to group your coding so that way it looks a lot nicer and so you can navigate it better. And also, to make sure it doesn't look like Scott Cawthon coding, which, if you've seen Scott's coding, you know what I'm talking about. So now what we're going to do is going to make a new condition. We're going to hover over to our mouse and keyboard, go over to our mouse, and then we're going to check for user clicks within a zone. Normally, we would have used user clicks on an object, but because the door and light buttons in this instance are just one object. We don't actually want to use that. Instead, we're going to actually just check for a specific zone that the user clicks on, which is essentially going to be the hitboxes for the door and light buttons. And so all we're going to do is we're just going to change these values here, and we're just going to align this to our general hitbox. So like you see this grid here, we're literally just going to try and align this to the door and light hitboxes as best we can. So it doesn't have to be specific, it can literally be whatever as long as it's not offset. So once you've done this, once it's about the size of the door button, we're going to click on OK. And there we go. Of course, if you used user clicks on object, you don't have to worry about this step. But otherwise, if you want your hitbox to be a bit more specific, you can use this function right here. Then we're going to make an action, navigate to the door buttons, head over to flags, and select toggle. Having a toggle function is useful for this scenario since we want the buttons to switch back and forth between being on and off, and it'll save us the trouble of using multiple lines for something simple like this. We're going to select our door status flag that we just created, and now if we run the game and add the door buttons into our debugger, if we view all of the flags and click on the hitbox, you can see how the flag is switching between being on and off. There are often neat little shortcuts and tricks like this in Clickteam that many people, especially beginners, don't know about, so I want to try and showcase as many of these as I can. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and drag this condition here into line 3 to copy it. And we're going to make the hitbox for the light button here now. After that, we'll drag our action from line 2 over to line 3, and we'll just change the flag that gets changed from door status to light status. Now, as you can see, the flags on both the buttons are fully functional. Alright, once that's finished, we're going to go back to line 2 here and make a new action underneath the one we already have. This time we're going to change the frame of our animation based on what flags we have turned on and off on our buttons object when we click on it. So we're going to go to animation, change, and click on animation frame. Now here we're going to create an equation that just takes the values of our two flags. So we'll navigate to our buttons object, hover over flags, hover over the option that has one of our flag names. For some reason, Clickteam splits up the flags into two halves, which is odd, but whatever. Then we're going to grab our door status flag. Next, we're going to add to this, and we'll do the exact same thing, but with our light status flag. Now, there's a catch to the way we have this set up. If we look back at the animation frames of our buttons object, you'll notice how the third frame has only the lights on and not the doors. Why is this important? Well, if we're using the flags in an equation, they'll act as 0 if they're off and 1 if they're on. So hypothetically, let's say we only have the light button on and the door button off with the equation we have set up right now. The animation would change to having the door button turn on instead of having only the light button turn on, because the equation is still setting itself to the second frame, which is where only the door button is turned on. For this reason, we want to make it to where having the light flag turn on sets the object to the third frame instead of the second, which I will do now. What we're going to do is, in the part of the equation where it grabs the light status flag, we're going to put this in parentheses. Then inside of this parentheses that we just made, we're going to have this flag be multiplied by 2. So now when the equation grabs this flag, it still shows up as 0 when it's off, but when the flag is turned on, it'll set the object's frame to the third one. Just in case anyone needs reminding, because it's a bit confusing, but animation frames are 0 indexed in Clickteam, so the first frame will be read as the number 0, hence why I didn't include a 1 at the beginning of this equation. So in hindsight, the third frame of the object will be read as 2. This will also cover if both the buttons are turned on, as if both the buttons are turned on, the two flags will add up to make 3 in this equation, which is the fourth frame of our object, and will properly showcase both of the buttons being on. Sorry if I spent a long time going on about this, but it's important you guys understand what's going on here, as just copying my work and calling it a day defeats the purpose of me teaching this stuff to you all. Anyways, that's going to be it for this action. It's just setting up the door visuals in an optimized way. Oh yeah, before we move on, it's important that the toggle flag action is above the action where the animation frame changes, because we want the visual change to occur after the respective flag has already been toggled, which won't happen if the visual change occurs before the flag is changed in this line. All we're going to do is take the action we just made and copy it. Then we'll paste it into the actions of line 3, since we want to do the exact same thing for the light button as well. As you can see, the buttons now change visually when we click on them. Now that the two buttons are fully functional, we're going to actually start setting up the doors and lights that toggle when they are turned on. We'll start with the doors first. We're going to make a new condition on line 4. Navigate to the doors object, hover over flags, and click on is a flag on. We'll select the door status flag for this. Then we're going to add another condition under line 4, which checks for the animation frame of a door. To do this, we'll navigate to our left door object, hover over animation, and select compare current frame to a value. As you might recall, the doors object that we have is a collection of frames with no animation speed. The reason why I have it set up like this is so that I don't have various separate animations and states that I need to worry about. If I can keep it all in one place, it'll be the most efficient solution in my opinion. Once we've selected this, we're going to set the comparison mode to lower, and check if the animation frame is lower than the number of frames in our door animation, -1, since remember animation frames in Clickteam are 0 based. So the final frame number will actually be 1 less than the total number of frames present in our object. What we're doing in this line is adding or subtracting 1 to the frame of our door object depending on whether the door status flag is turned on or not. To do this, we'll make a new action in line 4, go to our door object, and navigate to Animation, Change, Animation Frame. Now, since we'll be continually adding 1 to the object's frame number in this equation, we'll have to first obtain the door's current frame number first. Aside from alterable values and global values, there are very few functions in Clickteam that have built-in adding and subtracting functions that we can use. So most of the time, we'll just have to grab the current value of whatever we want to add into our equation and just it be added or subtracted by whatever value we want. In this case, we're going to add a +1 to the end of our equation. Once we're finished with that action, we're going to copy and paste the entire 4th line. The newly made 5th line will have mostly the same structure, just with a few tweaks to make it to where if the door is off, the game will have the door open back up to reflect that. On our 5th line, we're going to go back to our door buttons condition, checking if the door status flag is on. We're going to negate this by right-clicking on it and selecting negate. Now it will check if this flag is off. We'll also want to change our actual door object condition as well. We want to have the comparator be greater than instead of less, since this line will focus on subtracting instead of adding, and the number we have here currently will just be changed to 0. With our action, the only thing that needs to be changed is that we'll want to replace the plus with a minus, since we're now subtracting frames with this line instead of adding. If done properly, the door should look like this now. Although the door is now fully functional, it might be a bit too fast. We can slow down the progression of the animation frames by making an every condition underneath the rest of our other conditions. I'd recommend having the value be in milliseconds and in single digits, and from here you can mess with the number until the door speed looks how you want it to. Right now I have it set to every 2 milliseconds. Once we're done, we'll copy this condition and paste it into line 5 as well so the speeds aren't inconsistent. I also typically like to have everything else be on top of every conditions so that all of the requirements are met before the game decides to start running the intervals. Alright, the doors are pretty much done. Now it's time to start tackling the lights. We're first going to go back into our office object and we're going to import the visuals for our lights. If you just want to add 1 frame at a time, you can right click on the panel where all of the images are and click on New Frame. Then we'll start importing our images. Also, just a friendly reminder, make sure to set the animation speed to 0 since we're force changing the animation frames and want them to be static. Once we've done that, we're going to go back to our event editor. For this next line of code, we're going to be making the light visuals. We're going to make a new condition on line 6, navigate to our buttons object, and navigate to is a flag on, then click on light status. Afterwards, we'll make another every condition. For the interval, we're going to select the use a calculation option because we want the flickering for the light to be random. We'll be using the random range function for the interval. I'd recommend the range of numbers to be pretty big if you want a truly random effect with it flickering, but the numbers can be whatever you want. Once we set the numbers up, we'll make an action, navigate to the office, and select change animation frame. Since the second frame is the office with the left light on, we'll set the current frame to 1 here, though you'll want to set the number to whatever it is in your office object. Next, we're going to copy and paste line 6 and have this be a line where the office will flicker the light off at random intervals while the light button is still on. To do this, we're going to replace our first condition where it checks if the light status flag is on. We'll replace it by left-clicking on that specific condition and pressing replace. Instead, we're going to click on the office object and compare the animation frame to a specific value. Since we have 2 lights that will both be flickering, we're actually going to set the comparator here to different and have it check if the frame is different than 0. Then we're going to change the every condition. All we're doing here is just changing the numbers in the range. You can choose when and how you want the lights to flicker. I'm just doing it similarly to how it does in FNaF 1. Then for the action on line 7, we're just going to make it set the frame back to 0. Now that our lights and door code has been implemented, we'll actually want to change some things in a couple of events that we have previously. The first thing is that in line 3, where the game is checking for when we hit the light button, we'll want to insert a new action after the 2 that we already have here. We'll want to change the office's current frame to the light status flag of the door button. I know it says to change it to 1 specifically, but I've actually found a better and more optimized way to get the lights to do what we want since recording this footage. So basically, to force the animation frame to be the same as the light status flag, all we gotta do is click the left door button object, go to flags, and navigate until the light status flag is open. You may also notice this 8th line, which I haven't brought up. This was for disabling the lights as soon as the lights button is turned off, but with the condition we just implemented in line 3, it's completely useless, so we can just ignore it completely. There's just one last thing we should implement before moving on to the right side, and that's restricting when we can close the door. As you can see in this footage, we can toggle the door button while the door's animation is still playing. We want the game to prevent the door button from being pressed until the door is either fully closed or fully open. To do this, we're going to make a new condition in line 2, the event where the game checks if the door button has been clicked, and we're going to go to the special button. It's where start a frame and that sort of junk is. We're going to select the option titled Compare to General Values. Now, what we're doing is we're comparing the door frame to a specific value. The reason we're not using the normal check current frame function that the door object has is because the first part of the comparison that we're using will include an actual equation, which the built-in function for the door object doesn't have. With compare to general values, we can have equations on both sides of the comparison, which we want to have in this scenario. After clicking on it, we're going to replace the first half of the comparison with taking the exact frame from the door object. Afterwards, we're going to be using what is called modulus. Modulus is something that you'll learn a lot about in coding, but in this scenario, it basically acts as a sort of loop. To give you all an idea of how this works, let's say that I wanted a value to continually add until it reaches 100, in which I want it to loop back to 0. In a nutshell, the mod function essentially makes it to where the number after the mod function will cause the value we're adding to snap itself back to 0 once it has reached that number. After it's looped back to 0, it'll start adding itself from 0 again. Even though the actual value is over 100 now, the value that the game will read as with the mod function in place will be different. This is a very simple way of identifying modulus, and it's not the only thing that it's used for. However, with most Clickteam scenarios, this is the most practical way to look at it. So why does this matter? Because by using the mod function and setting the number after mod to be the max number of frames in our door animation, -1, because again, frames are 0 indexed, when the door is fully closed, we can manipulate the game into thinking the door's frame is at 0 when it's fully closed all the way, essentially having the door at a reliable state when it isn't playing animation. Since we want the button to only be toggleable whenever the door is at a state where its animation isn't playing, which in this case whenever the animation frame will be 0, we can leave the second half of the equation as just 0, hence the equation we'll be using looks like this. I know this was a lot for just a restriction, but trust me, modulus will be really helpful with a lot of things, not just in Clickteam, but with coding in general. If you ever have any scenarios where things will loop around, there's a good chance modulus is the most optimal way to make that happen, saving you from having to create several lines of code in order to do the exact same thing. Anyways, we're done with this equation. When running your game, the door should now only be toggleable whenever the animation isn't playing. I know it doesn't look like it, but I'm rapidly clicking the button here. Alright, it's time to implement the right side. Most of this is just going to be copying objects and code that we've just done, so we're nearly done with the tutorial. If you don't though, clone both the left door button and the left door objects, and make the copied objects for the right side, including changing the names and positions of both these objects. Once you've done that and you've changed the visuals accordingly, we're going to go back to our event editor and copy the code we've done so that we can set it up for the doors and lights on the right side. Let's copy lines 2 and 3 first. I'd recommend placing them below the rest of the code we have so far, but you can really place them wherever you want. Up to you. Since these new lines will be dedicated to entirely separate objects, the order of our lines really shouldn't matter in this scenario. In our new lines for the right buttons, which are lines 9 and 10 for the door and light respectively, we're first just going to change the hitbox code to match up with our right buttons. While changing the conditions, make sure that anything that checks for the left side is changed to the right side instead, i.e. flag conditions for the left button's object should be changed to the same flags but for the right button's object instead. Once you've changed all of the conditions, we need to change the actions in these lines too. Now, one of the main reasons why I love the normal event editor, the grid, more than the list editor, is because in the normal editor, it's very easy to just drag the action into a new object, delete the previous action that we don't want to have in the line, and call it a day. However, on the event list editor, we often have to outright replace the actions that we set up if we need to replace the object that it affects, which often means a lot of renavigation. Unfortunately, there isn't much we can do to make this easier or less annoying, so just replace the lines accordingly to affect the right side instead of the left. The only other thing to note about the actions we changed before moving on is this last action in line 10, which forces the office animation to 1. Since we're activating the right light here, we want this value to be entirely different from what it's set up as right now. In my case, I'll be changing it to 2, since the office with the right light on is the third frame in the office object. Now it's time for more copying. This time we're going to copy lines 4 and 5 and get the right door over with. Nothing else to really note here aside from just making sure all mentions of both the door and button objects on the left get properly replaced with ones on the right. As long as you do that, the right door should work as intended. Final thing to copy over is the lights. Now, I decided to make the right lights in my project not flicker compared to the left side just to show you guys how they both look. But if you did decide you'd want to make the right side flicker too, you'll want to copy and paste lines 6 and 7. Aside from replacing the left side objects to the ones on the right, just to make sure you're setting the forest animation frame actions to the current value instead of just leaving them to display the light on the left side instead of the right one. Now there's just a couple of things that we're going to do before we end off this tutorial. I'm playing off of FNaF 1 rules currently, which calls that if one light gets turned on, the other is forced off if it is also on the same time. So what we're going to do is on line 3, we're going to make a new action and navigate to the right door button. What we will do is turn the light status flag for the right button's object off. Also make sure that this appears above the action that changes the office animation frame, since we want the visuals to change once both of the button light status flags change. We also want to do the exact same thing in line 10, where the right button clicking code is, and have the left button flag light status be forced off in the same circumstance as what we just changed in line 3. Now, it won't be enough to just change the flag for the right button. We'll also want to make sure the button's visuals change too to reflect it being forced off. So what we'll do is under either lines 9 or 10, we're going to copy the action that changes the animation frame of the buttons object and paste it underneath line 3. Now we'll do the same thing for the other sides, copying the action that changes the animation frame of the left object, and we'll paste this action underneath line 10. Once properly implemented, this is what the lights should look like now. Okay, that will do it for this tutorial. We went over how to set up the office, the scrolling that we'll be using, and we fully coded the 2 door buttons as well as the doors and the lights. Next episode, we'll probably be going over more UI focused elements like the power and time, but I'm comfortable leaving the tutorial off at this. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you have any questions on anything, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.